Council of the Faculty of Computing and Electrical Engineering has in its meeting granted the printed permission to the doctoral dissertation of Master of Science Sami Vihavainen and appointed Professor Anil Day from Carnegie Mellon University as the opponent and undersigned as the custos. I declare the public examination of the doctoral dissertation open.
Honorable custos, honorable opponent, ladies and gentlemen, I will now present an introduction to my doctoral dissertation, Field Studies on User Experience of Automation in Context-Aware Social Media. So this thesis belongs to the field of human-computer interaction. Human-computer interaction is a subfield of computer science. More specifically, it relates to computer science and behavioral sciences, such as psychology, sociology, and cognitive science. The objective of human-computer interaction is to design interactive technologies that are easy to use, effective, efficient, and enjoyable. Well, in recent decades, we have seen that automation is everywhere. We don't have to walk stairs anymore if we don't want to, because the escalator takes us to the next level automatically. And whether we like it or not, many of our food products are processed automatically. And also in home electronics, our digital cameras make many decisions for us. So for example, we don't have to focus our cameras manually, but the camera is doing it by itself. Well, what has happened recently is that automation has been introduced also in processes that are social by nature. And what does that exactly mean? There are many internet-based services that have introduced context-aware means to automate social interaction. For example, Netflix movie viewing service, it senses when the user starts watching a movie, it analyzes what is that movie and makes a decision to disclose that information to users' friends on Facebook, for example, automatically without user control. So there are applications that may boast on users' behalf. However, is automation automatically a good thing for the user experience? That's what I wanted to find out. And I think we have to think about these questions because we have to design and develop technologies that people really want to use and they think they are useful. We shouldn't design and develop technology just because we can. We need to know what kind of implications they have for the people who are involved with them. Okay, so let's do some research. I wanted to start searching for the benefits and costs automation have in context of social media. And my approach was to study people when they use those technologies and services in their everyday lives. So I wanted to get deep understanding about how is technology involved in their lives and what kind of benefits they think that automated features especially, and what kind of costs automated features have for their social interaction. I did several field studies with my colleagues, and where people used different kind of technologies from 3 weeks to 2 months, depending on the case. Altogether, over 130 participants were involved, and about 70 hours interview data was gathered. I used multiple data gathering methods. Face-to-face interviews were the main one. Then there were focus groups, automatic data logs, and also questionnaires were conducted. Well, let's see these technologies I was talking about. One was a location awareness system, which automatically sensed user's location through his mobile phone and disclosed that information to user's friends automatically. Then we did a mobile learning case where a class of elementary school class used mobile homework applications, and the teacher was able to see and track all the time when the student accessed one of the homeworks and how she progressed with that. Then we had a case on mobile notifications, where social notifications from users' social networking site was pushed to users' phone's desktop without user having to do anything. And last, we did a collaborative video remixing studies, actually two case studies where people took mobile video during rock concerts, and afterwards those video clips were gathered together and an automatic remixing algorithm just magically did a video compilations out of those. And one nice part in those case studies were that we got to arrange a real rock concert. Okay, let's look at the findings. Let me first say that automation is a trade-off. So it may support user in her goals, but there are also challenges. As I raised the question, is automation automatically good? The answer is no. Well, let's look at the pros and cons. First, how automation can support user experience. First, it can help the user to be aware of her social surrounding. Then, from our perspective, it can facilitate the creation and publishing media content. So a user always don't have the burden to manually do everything, especially if she's on the move with his mobile phone. And third, automation may lower the threshold people to participate in collaborative actions. The user doesn't necessarily have to understand the whole infrastructure and the whole every detailed part of the technology to be able to participate, because the computer does some of the tasks. Well, what about the challenges then? One of the challenges is that the communicativeness of the information may suffer. So there might be problems with user to interpret the information that is mediated by the service. She necessarily doesn't know that if the information is made by a machine or if it's made by a human, and that may result some problems with understanding of the for example, reliableness of the information. Second, there are privacy concerns happening. People may feel that people may perceive that they cannot control the information that is disclosed about them or information that is coming to them. And for example, they might not perceive that they can be in control of the impressions how other people see them. And then there are problems with maybe problems with understanding the logic of the system. If the user doesn't know how the system works, it may be that the outcomes are not as she would like them to be. So we gained some understanding about what are the pros and cons, but how should we design those technologies? Well, it's not enough that with automation we aim for efficiency, but we need to take into account user social and emotional goals in that context. Second, we have to remember and understand that automation is not all or nothing. It can be really low, where the user does everything manually, or it can be high, really high, where the computer ignores the human totally. But there are a lot of the middle ground is big. And last, we need to remember that eventually user will want to practice control over their social interaction, and they will practice it one way or another. For example, they can behave differently outside the technology, and they can, for example, shut it down because it's everyday technology. They don't have to use it if they really don't want to. Okay, so if we keep these lessons in mind, I believe we have a very good basis for designing pleasant user experience of automation for context-aware social media. And now I ask you, Honorable Professor Day, as the appointee by the Faculty of Computing and Electrical Engineering, to present your observations and comments on my dissertation. Use the appropriate.
In particular, it uses a series of field studies, which is the ones you pointed out, a series of 5 field studies, as well as an overview study to explore and understand the impact on the user experience. when individuals are using these automated systems and social media applications in particular to auto-generate content for other people to consume, to receive information to be consumed by themselves, and to generate new channels for collaboration amongst individuals within a social network. This work attempts to answer questions about how users can use automation in these different settings, but also the challenges that arise from these different settings. My read of the thesis is that the candidate's thesis has 4 main contributions. The first is an understanding of the costs and benefits of these 3 different forms of automation: generating input for others to consume, generating output to be consumed by the user, and automating this generation of collaborative media. The second is in identifying what role automation has to play in the face of varying goals across users, both their pragmatic and hedonic goals or tasks. But that similarly the task or the type of automation cannot conflict with these goals, otherwise it will negatively impact the user experience. The third main contribution is an understanding that automation can lower a user's sense of control, particularly in social media systems. They may have difficulty understanding the information that is being produced for them. They may have issues with the timing of such information. They may have difficulty maintaining their own personal sense of boundary or privacy within their social system or social structure. And relatedly, they may have difficulty managing the self-impression they are able to convey to others. The fourth and final contribution is the set of 5 implications that was alluded to for how to design such systems, or how to, in some cases, choose not to have automation in the system that should be built into these context-aware social systems. This dissertation falls into a fairly unique area that has not been explored to a great degree. That is the automation of context-aware services within a social media structure. There's been a lot of work in the human-computer interaction community on each of these topics individually: automation, context awareness, and social media, but the combination is fairly unique. As such, particularly with the ability that we all have to attain a relationship or maintain a connection to one social network because we carry around mobile phones, smartphones throughout the day, there's a particular need for the kind of work that the candidate is producing to figure out how to determine how to continuously manage this flow of information from individuals, about individuals, and to individuals to maintain that social structure. The contributions laid out here may not just apply to this unexplored intersection, but may apply more generally to automated systems in general, and I look forward to talking to the candidate about some of these issues. And while we find ourselves particularly in the middle of what I would like to call a golden age of social computing, the findings of this thesis have the potential to have tremendous impact for those. So I will end my statement there. So first, before I begin my very long set of questions, I want to commend you on the work that you've done. It's quite an impressive body of work with the studies that you have done. But I have questions about the individual studies. I have questions about the overall design implications, and I have questions about the role of automation. So maybe I can start with questions on the approach that you took in the research. So in your thesis, in the candidate's thesis, there was the study of 5 different systems, and then an analysis, an overarching analysis of 3 different systems for social media settings. In these, there was not new technical innovation undertaken by the candidate, but a study of existing systems. I actually very much appreciate that approach. Another approach that could have been taken would be to specifically build a novel context-aware social media application, and where you had the option to completely configure the level of automation. And I wonder if you could begin by talking about the trade-offs between the approach that you took, where you studied existing systems and had little ability to control the automation, with this alternative approach.
Sure. Thank you for the interesting question. I would say I started the idea that, from the idea that technologies have to be reusable. So, for example, a couple of my case studies technologies were off-the-shelf technologies. So most of the bad usability issues specifically on the automation-related questions. But on the other hand, as you said, the other approach could have been the build new technologies, and that would have made it possible, for example, to make different kind of versions of that particular technology, and kind of different kind of versions considering the level of automation, and it could have been possible to get deep understanding of that too.
Okay, thank you. Another related question is about the length and the number of participants. I'm curious about your opinion on whether, so if I remember correctly, your studies lasted between 3 weeks and 2 months.
That's correct.
I'm wondering whether a more focused, longitudinal study that will allow you to see how people adopted and drop the use of, and then maybe potentially even readopted applications. What do you think about the length of your study? If you were to give advice to the next generation of graduate students, do you have an idea of whether the length of study that you perform is sufficient to do the kind of analysis that you wanted to do?
So, I think that when people start using technology, especially new kind of technology, they often, the results actually showed that they often felt a feeling of novelty with the technology, but that didn't actually last very long. And certainly there might be changes in the use of technology when it's used for a year or for 2 years. It is possible, yes. But I guess it's related to objective, what do you really want to understand and know. And it really takes at least several weeks with these kind of new technologies to kind of to learn and find that whether I'm interested in it or not. Also, like these all were social media related technologies. So the group of who are you using it with affects on how you perceive how useful technology is for you. So of course that can change. That can change in time. So I think it's a trade-off between resources and what you want to find out. So of course I would love to observe people using these technologies for a year, for example. But I just have to finish this thesis.
Fair enough. One of the most interesting insights I got from your thesis wasn't in the thesis proper, but was actually sort of hidden away in a paragraph in one of the associated papers. And I have to find the exact place, but it was in your study of, it was in publication number 1, I believe, where you made the observation that within 1 week of using, it's publication number 2, within 1 week of using it, the subjects had either decided, I'm going to continue using it, or they had completely dropped it. And that people were able to make this decision so quickly. Yeah. And I'm going to come back to this point later, but I thought one of the interesting things was that designers of systems have such a short window in which to impress upon the user the value of their systems. And I'm wondering if you could comment a little about how designers, given the 3 or 5 findings that you talked about in your opening statement, can possibly design, given that they only have a small number of interactions with which to convince a user of the value of automation.
Yeah. Yeah, actually the results you just talked about, it was one of the design implications in the particular paper, publication number 2. Yeah, the one approach for that would be to try to design adaptivity for the technology so that it kind of it starts to analyze how the user uses the technology and kind of collaborates with the user for example, for that 1 week, and tries to find out the proper control that user wants in her context.
So that would make sense for applications like the Facebook application, where you're going to have many exposures to it within that week. But it may not be as useful for something like the video editing system, where unless I have a particular kind of lifestyle, I'm not going to a concert every night. Do you feel like the one that, given the small number of interactions that may occur for the video editing, the collaborative video editing system, you may have a longer period of time with which to convince a user, or do you still feel like you have maybe that one opportunity in that sense?
Well, I actually think that the same kind of findings came up from that study too. So in that way, in those kind of technologies, I think more appropriate approach may be to give different kinds of levels of user control in the beginning. So, but the problem, of course, then is that usability may suffer. If there are too many control possibilities for the user, she might be overwhelmed with the user interface. Of course, in that problem, one solution is that you make all the simple and the most important things, just put them on the front, and then hide some special controls deeper inside.
And at some point, if we get to expose those over time.
But that's one possibility, yeah, sure.
I'm curious about the timing of the work that was completed. So, if one wanted to do research on smartphones, say 5 years ago, you would have a number of people that were early adopters of the smartphone. At least today, what we think of as the smartphone. In your case studies, you're presenting forms of automation that I would guess most of your users did not have exposure to in the past, maybe with the exception of maybe the Facebook. Is that a fair statement?
Sorry, exposure?
Exposure and experience with automation in social media systems. Clearly, those using Facebook have had experience with it,
exactly.
but maybe not the video editing users, and maybe, I'm not sure about the microblogging one, whether they would have had previous experience with that. So I'm curious as to, if you were to hypothesize doing this same work 5 years from now, when users were more exposed to automation in their systems, because right now we have fairly little automation in terms of our social media systems, what do you think your results would be different?
I don't think so. Not in a large scale, at least. Maybe the first impressions about the technologies may not be that okay, I cannot lie anymore, but because they have kind of grown into that. But still, these same social interaction related rules they will keep. So I don't think the boundary regulation will be lost in 5 years.
What about so one of the specific implications you talked about is, one of the specific implications you talked about was, the logic, right. Understanding the logic of automation. Now, in time, I would expect that people's ability to form reasonable mental models about complex systems would improve the more exposure they have to these these systems. I may not know exactly how this system that you're presenting to me now works, but because I've had lots of exposure to similar kinds of systems, my ability to create a reasonable mental model would change. Do you think that those kinds of implications for how designers should design for positive, useful conceptual models may change given users that have more exposure?
Well, it may be easier for the users to trust the system if they have some experience of the previous ones and they have been able to make some quite accurate mental models. And of course trust, when I mean trust, so people have positive expectations that the system, one, it is motivated to work for the user, and two, it's competent in working for the user. So from positive, they know how technology works. On the other hand, they may have some bad experiences with technology too. And okay, again, this kind of new social media technology, blah blah blah. There's so much things going on here. I just don't want to. I don't have time to start looking into it again.
So, to step back a little bit, one question I had for the entire thesis, and I understand the need to scope, because that's obviously an important part of the thesis, is deciding what to include and what not to include. But I'm curious about the choice to focus on social media in particular. It seems like addressing the problem of automation for any kind of user-facing system seems to be important, whether it involves the aspect of social media or not. So I'm wondering what you can comment at all on what additional problems or features social media brings to this problem of automation in user interfaces that makes it unique as opposed to some other domain that is not about social media.
Well, that's a good question. Thank you. Related to social media, of course, one big part is that, well, it's for people to interact with each other. And in every kind of social interaction, there is they do self-presentation, and that's a very unique thing. I think it's special for the social media, and that from that self-presentation we come to privacy, and like it seems that it's in social media privacy things are emphasized. Of course, there are privacy things. If I turn like this, I want to keep more privacy than I'm like this. So we see privacy things, of course, in everyday lives out of the social media too. But I think it's emphasized there, and it's kind of a new thing there, which we have to know and understand.
Right. This may be a stretch, and I'm going to ask you about how to generalize some of your results a little bit later in my questioning. But given the description you just gave, or given the features that you just described, do you believe that your findings could apply to situations where information is disclosed, information about an individual is disclosed to somebody else, even though it wasn't intended to as part of a social media structure? So I can give you a concrete example. In my house, we used to have a weigh scale that spoke your weight out loud. My children loved it. My wife did not like anybody else to be in the environment when it spoke its weight out loud, but of course we were. So there's a case where it wasn't intended to be a social media structure, but it acted that way. And I'm wondering if you think the kind of results you have about privacy and expectation of automation would apply to those kinds of situations as well.
Sure, yeah. Actually, yeah, as you said, the weight scale, it kind of turned into social media in a way that it, because it was broadcast, it made social interaction happen. So So sure, especially when we are going to have these new kinds of context-aware technologies around our house, I think many of those everyday technologies we are using now can turn into social media that way.
Okay. And you believe that your results should equally apply to those kinds of problems?
Well, I believe so.
Okay. One more question about the approach, even though we've kind of gotten off approach a little bit, and then I'll move on to something else, a different topic. I was curious about, so I really liked the fact that you used a number of mixed methods to do your work, but I was curious about the lack of use of experience sampling in particular. So experience sampling could give you, I understand that you did interviews at different parts of your studies, and they were semi-structured interviews, but the experience sampling could give you more direct feedback, a more immediate feedback about why a user chose to or did not choose to use a piece of automation. And I'm just wondering if you had thought about using experience sampling at all to collect information.
Well, first of all, I didn't want to, it's kind of wanted to give the technology for the everyday use and didn't want to intervene that much. So that was my approach in that.
It's a difficult trade-off. Okay. So, one of the topics I struggled with when I was reading your thesis, and every once in a while I think I got the idea and then I lost it, was I understand that users have different kinds of goals when they're trying to use these social media systems, and that the idea of what the goal is that the user's trying to accomplish is of primary importance for your thesis work. But I guess I struggled with understanding, by example, what the difference was between pragmatic goals and hedonic goals. So I'm wondering if you could more clearly differentiate those two for me.
Sure. I'm glad to do that. Let's take an example of doing a phone call. Like, if I want to call my mom, the pragmatic task there would be to take the phone out from my pocket and press the keys, take my mom's number, and call her. That's my pragmatic goal. However, my more like a hedonic goal, social interaction related goal, is to be related with my mom. So that is the difference. So it's kind of a higher level goal, the end goal.
Can you give me an example where the pragmatic goal may be in conflict with the hedonic goal? Because in much of the analysis of the studies that were completed, there was the conclusion that was reached was that if the system is able to support the pragmatic goal but not support the hedonic goal, it results in lower user experience. So the example you gave, the pragmatic goal very much is in service of the hedonic goal.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example where there's a mismatch?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, and here we come to the level of automation. So if the automation level in the pragmatic tasks is so high that the user feels that he cannot control the hedonic goal she has, then there's a conflict. So what I mean that, let's take this phone call example again. If my phone would be so context aware that it would know that, okay, I haven't called my mom for a week, it would do it automatically. It would, for example, when I put it on the table and time is like 8 p.m. Monday evening, it says that automatically, hey, now I'm going to call to your mom. So in that way, the system takes control of the user's social interaction with
And in that case, it's supporting the hedonic goal but not the pragmatic goal.
Well, of course, it depends. If the user wants to be in contact with her mom, then it supports her the hedonic goal. Yeah, but that's a tricky thing that these social interaction related goals, they are pretty dynamic, and they change all the time.
All right, we need to come back to this topic, I think, as we're discussing automation, because I think there's still some situations that I get confused about. On the topic of automation, I have several questions. So in using contextual information that is acquired through the smartphone or through other sources of information, the social media, there can often be a gap between what context can be perceived by a system and what might actually be occurring, because the sensors only give you a proxy of what is actually occurring in any given situation. And the same may be true even if it's manually entered information, that a user may be giving you a proximal answer that represents, it's not fully representative of a situation. And I'm wondering if you can comment on what role automation plays in a situation where there's this gap between what's actually happening and what's presented.
Yes, that's a good question, and I think it's currently in human-computer interaction. It's a very important issue. Like there's always this term that social technological gap. Okay, the technology can never answer all for the social goals. And in this case, automation comes important in a way that it's always a restricted representation from the surrounding, and that is why I think the user manual control in those cases is actually really, really important. And it's hard to actually see that the manual control will vanish at all, because, as you said, the context changes so rapidly. And now we only talk about the current activities. What about the intentions? What people are intent to do? I think that's a whole different level of challenge.
That answer tells me what we might expect users to do in terms of being able to manually override or take more responsibility for the control or the passing of information. But do you have a sense of whether the level of automation will need to be diminished in situations where there's a greater gap between what's perceived and what's actually occurring? Or do you think the automation can stay the same and the user will the role the user takes? You could imagine changing either side.
Yeah, it's kind of a, as my results show, it's kind of a trade-off in that way. Of course, if the technology doesn't support user experience well enough, the user will take control actions outside the technology. So, for example, in one of my studies with the echolocation sharing technology, user had just forgot that the icon is on, and she was with some other people, but afterwards she realized that, okay, maybe other eye contacts also saw this, and now they have some kind of assumptions that I wouldn't want them to have. So in that way, user can have like control after the happening. If she just develops some kind of new reasons that she can, for example, explain that, okay, I just happened to be there, or she can blame the technology, and that the technology is not, it's not reliable. So that kind of control possibilities outside of the technology.
So that brings up a few interesting questions that I hadn't thought about before. One is, if the user can control, or if the user can take control outside of the system itself, does that ease the burden on the designer in designing the system? Does it allow them to build a less thoughtful system, for lack of a better word, because they can assume that the user will take control as they need to?
Maybe it depends on these designers, because I think it kind of makes it more challenging. If you really want to do a good technology, you really have to understand what are the users' everyday actions, and you need to understand the needs and specific contexts.
So I guess another way to ask that question is, if I'm designing such a system, should I be putting more of my effort in understanding the user so well that I design the automation to an optimal level? Or should I be designing mechanisms that allow the user to take control? Let's assume I can only do one of those. Obviously there's a middle ground where I do some of both. But where would you suggest designers, as a result of the implications of your findings, where would you suggest designers put their effort? And I'm not sure there's a right answer here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. Well, it depends on what are your groundings, like what kind of resources you have for the development. It's easier for the designer to make those decisions when he's in his own cubicle coding, and then give the control possibilities for the user. But I think it's more a holistic way to design if you go out and really try to understand users' actions.
So do you have a recommendation then?
Recommendation?
Which to put your effort on?
Well, I would still say that it depends.
That's fair. To come back to my original question, which is about this gap in terms of what's perceived and what's actually occurring in the situation, you might have a similar, not gap, but you might have a similar issue with the fidelity or trust or accuracy or uncertainty in the information that might be disclosed to somebody. So in your systems, you disclosed what the system understood to be ground truth. So whether it was the microblogging site where you were disclosing location abstracted to some place label, or the video was being, when in the automated video editing system, it was using contextual information to cue and to edit or mix the videos together. Well, you can imagine, and there are systems out there in social media that are doing more than that. They're trying to create inferences about what the user is doing and not just recording directly the low-level context. In those situations where they are doing those inferences, could you talk about not what role automation plays, but what's the role of the designer in dealing with in either exposing or supporting automation in a different way, given uncertainty in the information? That's it. Right now, I'd say the more common case is no uncertainty. You get a piece of context, you know where somebody's located, and you're able to present that. But we're very quickly moving to a set of applications. We now have already seen applications in the social media space that are predicting or detecting that I'm on my bike or I'm in my car, and it's exposing that readily on Facebook.
Yeah, kind of activity recognition.
Right.
Yeah.
So for those kinds of things where certainty is far from 100%, what role should automation play, and what role should the user play in either correcting or modifying before publication?
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of uncertainty, it will exist, sure. And that is why one of my design guidelines is that designers should seriously thinking about including manual control mechanisms. So in cases the system may make wrong conclusions, it can be corrected. For example, in a music listening service, Last.fm, user is able to make corrective technological actions after her music listening behavior is disclosed. She can just delete some of the data that is online already. But of course, there should be, in these kinds of cases, for example, there could be manual control possibilities for a user to explain those kind of situations. So, kind of give additional information, kind of, for example, a comment box beside the automatically disclosed information that this was not totally accurate.
So I'm just imagining my computers or my phone telling the world about everything that I'm doing, and then me having to explain the behavior of my phone. It seemed a little bit crazy.
But it's happening.
But it is happening, yeah. So I don't know, are people explaining the behavior of their automated devices yet? I haven't seen that part yet. Certainly the first part.
I have seen that.
Oh, you have?
Yeah. Okay. When we did a study with ZoneTag, it's not included here, but ZoneTag is a camera phone photo uploading and tagging application. And in ZoneTag there was this feature which automatically included location metadata into the photo. And one of my users took a photo in the middle of San Francisco, but it automatically tagged that the location was Oakland. And then he got a bunch of comments that, hey, what is this place in Oakland? It doesn't seem like Oakland. And then he had to reply that, hey, it's just this zone tag I'm using. It's not really accurate.
Interesting. When do you think, you referred to somebody's model, and I've forgotten whose model it is, where they talk about the 4 different processes for performing automation. There was acquisition all the way to executing a decision. I don't remember the terms in the middle, but there's 4 different processes. You've described users taking control, for the most part in this discussion, you've described users taking control after that 4th stage, after the computer, this automated system, has already made the decision. What role or responsibility do the designers have in supporting control before that stage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very important.
Because it might be too late. Like the embarrassment factor might be any explanation might be inappropriate.
And one thing I want to emphasize is that the control possibilities have to be in many ways included before the actual disclosure. Actually, sure. Yeah. For example, before the system discloses the information, user can, for example, have control in deciding was the third stage. Deciding what is the information content, so that the computer doesn't do it all along. And then there's the implementation phase, the fork phase, and for example, also there, user could have, for example, time to veto before the actual disclosure. And I actually think that on Netflix, they have just introduced this, this disclosure feature I was talking in my introduction lecture. And in that feature, there is for user time to veto before the disclosure. First, the system analyzes, senses, and what is the user watching, but it doesn't disclose the information before the user has watched the movie for a couple of minutes. So it's kind of more controllable for the user in that way.
Just so I understand, in that case, the user has the option to stop watching the movie,
That is correct.
but if they continue watching the movie, it gets automatically disclosed.
Sure, but she can of course
Delete it afterwards.
yeah. I'm not actually sure on Netflix can he delete it, but he can go offline. He can go offline from the disclosure feature. Yeah. If he's kind of if her situation awareness is good enough. So of course that's one important thing with automation.
So if you just enumerate the possibilities with a 4-phase process for automation, there's sort of 5 opportunities to have control, right? Before and after each one, it works up to 5. You've described 3, and they're sort of the last 3. Do you think that a designer needs to build in support for all 5 into any application, or that building support for these last 3 is sufficient?
Sorry, could you?
Yeah. So let me see if I can find it. So there's acquisition, right? What was the second phase?
Well, on
Second
page
process?
52.
Thank you.
Yeah. Matrix.
52. Maybe different numbering here. So you can imagine that the system could, before acquisition, oh, 52, I'm sorry, I misheard you. It's okay. Oh, no, this was not the one I was thinking of.
Oh.
This is the 10 stages of automation. I was talking about the 4 stages of processing.
Well, it's in there to acquire, analyze, decide, and implement.
Oh yes, right, that's right. Okay, thank you. So you can imagine that before any information is acquired, the user could have control over what gets acquired. And then between acquire and analyze, you could say what information could get analyzed and maybe even the process for analysis. Then between analysis and decide, you could have input into what kinds of decisions are even available. And then between decisions, right, so you can imagine having at each stage.
Yeah.
These are decisions that up till now have mostly been in the hands of the designer. The designer is making the decisions on behalf of the user. I think you've made a fairly compelling argument that the designer just can't possibly know all of the choices. So I guess I'm wondering, what is the role of the designer then in deciding where to provide those touch points for the user?
Well, that is a tricky one, of course. But actually, what I would like to see in some of the new social media services would be that user would have kind of I'm not sure if it should be this complex, but some kind of a control panel for the automation of the automation level of the actions. For example, on Facebook, now there are a lot of privacy settings where you can choose that, okay, I want to disclose this to these people, but not these people. But there is no settings where I could say that, okay, with these people, ask me first, but with these people, disclose everything. So I would like to see kind of control panels for users to use.
Right.
Of course, there's a problem with usability and
right. Okay. So there's a related question here around, and it's based on something you said in your previous the answer to your previous question, which was other people can see the results of what I've posted, and then that requires me, or what the system is posted on my behalf, and that brings up this need for me to correct or at least explain the behavior. What role should history play in these social media sites? Do you have any any guidelines that you can suggest for designers on how long to keep history, so that maybe some of these inadvertent disclosures that are done automatically are less impactful, are less damaging to one's self-management?
Yeah, well, actually, in my last design implication related to logic of automation, one of the things I would like to see users to consider is some kind of access to historic databases, and I think that's important so that the users can gain more deep understanding of how the technology works, and in that way they may be able to predict future outcomes.
Right, so I see the value of me being able to see either my own history or small numbers of other people's history, but how long should my history exist in the public eye, in my social networks view, before it starts to impact me negatively?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the situation is that if it's going to be online, you cannot take it away.
Sure.
But of course you can try to hide it. I don't have an answer for that, like how many days or how many weeks.
Do you see a value in limiting it though? Or do you really feel like once it's out there, it really should be out?
I definitely see a value for limiting that. And I think Facebook is again a good example when they changed their profile site. Some of the actions people had done like many years ago just popped up, they were very, how do you say, in front in this new interface.
Right.
And then people were like, hey, I haven't really actually done this, or have I? And yeah, the limitations has its values.
So similarly, do you feel like users should have the ability to go and manually edit or correct recent posts that are done automatically, or that they should be able to go back and correct anything?
Well, there are many social media services, and there are different kind of social norms how one should act in that particular service. And it may be that it is okay for the community that the user goes and makes some changes. Maybe it gives for the community, it gives more reliable information, and they appreciate that. But on the other hand, it may be that they just think that, okay, now she's trying to lie, and that may not be okay for the user community.
I read about an application in a magazine on the flight over for Facebook that should you break up with your girlfriend or boyfriend, you can just enter the name in this app, or you can select a name from your friend, and it wipes out all history from your Facebook profile, which I thought was interesting. So it goes and gets rid of all the photos that the person was tagged in that you're associated with. It gets rid of any entries you've made where you listed that person. I thought it was an interesting re-editing of history. So I was kind of curious what your thoughts were about that.
Well, it's kind of we shouldn't make that big distinction between the real world and the virtual world. People burn photographs too, so it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah. Back to the question of designing for automation. It seemed to me that even so you pointed out correctly that, and the example you gave earlier about making a phone call to your grandmother or to your mother, seems it was about efficiency. I don't have to remember to do this because the phone didn't help me remember whether my hedonic goal actually matches that or not. So I'm trying to understand what kinds of tasks are not about efficiency in the kinds of tasks you're thinking about supporting. So what role does automation play for non-efficient tasks? For tasks where the goal is not just about efficiency. What benefits can I get that are not just about efficiency from automation?
Yeah. Well, for example, based on my research data, it says that we should think the process. We should think the process through the levels of automation and through the different stages of the information processing, and from there we can if we understand the user's real goals. For example, in our video remixing case, we had two stakeholders: the fans and then the artists. And for the fans, it was okay that the video compilations were not really artistic, but the goal was that they should be good for memorabilia, just to represent a good feeling. But for the artists, they just they wanted that the video compilation would represent in a good way the interaction between the band and the fans, so that if people see that online, they want to really come to see their next concert. And that's an example of two different kind of goals. And
I guess I still have trouble separating that from the goal of efficiency, or the fact that the system's making the task more efficient. So take the memorability one. So people were trying to produce these videos that had some sense of nostalgia or memorabilia about them. I could do it myself, right? But it would take me a long time. And having the system do it, as we found out the quality was good, they seemed to trust the automated systems, and they were kind of surprised at the quality of the automated systems. But to me, that while there's this secondary goal of the primary goal is memorabilia, but from an automation perspective, the goal was the fact that it's efficient made it possible. Same for the goal that the band has about wanting an artistic video. If the system was capable, if it had some aesthetic quality to it, of producing it, it would be all about, it's the efficiency that makes it possible. Even if I were doing this manually, I would want an efficient process to do it. So I'm just really struggling to understand whether automation is making processes more efficient so that I can satisfy some other goal, or whether automation is the goal itself. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, well, automation goal itself. That I think it's kind of a pretty usual engineering thinking that, okay, let's automate this if
right.
we can. But I think that's what I want to argue here, that okay, we should really automate only those tasks that are necessary for the user's goals. And sure, making efficiency is a good thing, but more important is that efficiency is in the right places of the process, and we just have to understand what are the right places in the process.
How do you, again, one of the reasons I like this work so much is because I think it leads to a lot more interesting discussions about the design process. But one of the problems with that is that as a designer of such systems, I'm not sure how to apply your findings always. So for example, should I spend more effort as a designer on, let's take the video editing example. So you found that for the manually user-produced video, it was of high quality, but it took that user a long time to do it. None of the other users were willing to spend the time to do it. One choice could be that I spend my effort on improving or making more efficient the manual editing process. Or I can spend my effort and make an automated version. How do I, as a designer, decide, either beforehand or even afterwards, after building both, what I should go forward with? It's quite, because doing either one is enough effort, doing both is a lot of effort. So how do I decide when do I make the manual process better And when do I introduce this level of efficiency for these social media systems?
Well, I appreciate your question. We already talked about this a little bit, and how do you make a decision? If I reframe your question myself,
Please.
so how do I make a decision whether or not I put my efforts on understanding users' needs, or that way, the right control possibilities?
No, let me rephrase it then. So the user's needs are the same. I want to produce a memorable piece of video so I can remember this concert after the fact. So the question is, do I support the manual construction of that? Do I support the manual facilitation of that goal? Or do I support the automatic facilitation of that goal?
Well, in that case, I would go for the automatic one.
Why is that?
Well, it emphasizes the media creation, and if the goal of making the video is kind of the same, if the automatic one kind of fulfills the needs of the user, I would go for the automatic one. Of course, there are some other things than control that makes technology or systems important for people. For example, they may wanna have a challenge to use the technology and get to know, take it as a challenge. As one of my participants in the particular study said that, hey, I just wanted to take this challenge. I wanted to learn how to use this. It took me a long time, but I wanted to do that. So people can get good experiences from just using the technology and learning and achieving. And also psychology research says that people prefer similar outcomes, which are made by themselves compared to are made someone else. So in that way, the manual way has pros,
Right.
But that's only related to using the technology, and if the only goal is just to get the same thing, then why shouldn't you automate it?
That's a fairly bold statement to make. That you don't believe you'll lose much if you can satisfy the goal in a manual way or an automated way to automate the process, and that you won't lose much from the manual process. Because there is something about construction or co-construction of artifacts that people find, not just that they they find gratifying.
Mm-hmm.
And to take, I'm thinking, we often think about visions of the future and what will people be doing 20 years from now. Will we come home and say, I want roast chicken for dinner, and boom, 20 minutes later, roast chicken pops out of this food producer thing. And it takes away the construction, and I worry a little bit about whether we should automate just because we can.
No. I didn't mean that.
Okay.
I didn't mean that. As I tried to explain, there are other things, like people prefer things that they have made themselves compared to made by someone else. But
you have to appreciate the role of the struggle a designer might have with this conversation, right? So, how put yourself in that role of the designer, as you have been for some of these systems. What decision would you make? Can you give me a concrete example where you would make one decision versus another, and the factors that you would use to make the decision? Because that's the thing that you want to pass on to future designers that are going to leverage your work for designing systems. So
Yeah. Well, I think again this example from my research with video remix. If my users would be the band, I would definitely get them more control possibilities.
Manual construction.
Exactly. And but in case of the fans, I would most probably automate it more. So I don't think there's a silver bullet, but that again brings up the question of the importance. How important is it to know the needs of the users?
So that brings me to another point that I guess I was surprised when I read your thesis that this term didn't come up. You have on that same matrix on page 52 these 10 levels of automation. And correct me if I'm wrong. Let me find the page myself. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the systems that you examined supported completely automated versus no automation. Was there anything in the middle for what you examined, what you explored?
Well, there was some.
Can you remind me?
Yeah, for example, with Yaipu, in the disclosure implementation, the system informs the user when the disclosure happens. If the user
Opted into that.
exactly.
Right. So that would be automation level 9, is that right?
9 or 8.
Or 8, right. Okay.
But
What's that?
but you are correct with that the comparison was pretty much manual to fully automatic or highly automatic.
Right.
And I think that was a good perspective in a way that that gave that emphasized kind of the results and the pros and cons got more.
From an approach perspective, I think it makes complete sense. From a pragmatic perspective, though, given the answer to the last question you gave me about sort of the changing role of whether things should be manual or automated, the term that I was surprised I didn't see in your thesis was mixed initiative systems. And you can imagine in a video construction that maybe it's not just the system that's automatically doing it and the user doing it, but that they're actually co-constructing this video together. It would be interesting to see in that case whether you could get a result that satisfied a lot of constraints. It didn't take too much time on the part of the user, still produced a memorable result, which you would expect to because the quality should be higher than what the system did automatically, and was able to satisfy the needs of the band. So I'm wondering how much you thought about mixed initiative systems, even though I fully appreciate why you chose the approach to just look at these sort of extremes.
Well, I actually did. Yeah, there were some of these projects, some of these case technologies, and where we had intentions to include different kinds of levels of automation in them, but due to practical reasons, we just in those cases we were not able to do that.
Sure.
But for example, the study set up I talked to you earlier, where I could have a possibility to build like several different kinds of automation control possibilities and compare those.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether this structure, this automation structure that was developed by Praecursoria is too limiting in that it doesn't really support much in the way of mixed initiative interaction. It allows the system to do a lot of choices and the human to help make decisions, but it doesn't allow the human to take much initiative in this. That there's room to certainly augment this with the idea of, this is a very system-oriented view of the world, and I'm wondering that from your perspective, I think you're actually able to, you added the social media part to this to this model, but I think you have the opportunity to really impact this from a user taking the control as well. So, okay. Were there situations where, so for the case where the in the video remixing system, the AVRS system, were there situations, or any of the systems that you experienced, were there systems where the users were calling for more automation? Were users savvy enough to realize that certain things that they may not have realized could be automated, and that they were actually asking for automation?
Asking for more.
For more automation. Is there a crying need for it, from the user's perspective?
Well, for many of the in the publication 2 and in publication 3 and also 4, people had positive expectations, and they were.
Sorry, 2 is the socially app?
Yeah, socially applicable. They had positive expectations related to automation, and many of them first impression was that, hey, this is really a cool thing. This should be handy. And education for people actually rated automatic remixes and manually made remixes equal as a memorability.
So those are cases where the user explained what they saw the value of the current level of automation were. Were there any instances where they asked for additional automation? Where they saw a need for additional automation beyond what you had already provided? In asking this question, I'm trying to get a sense of what your users understood and didn't understand about automation, and whether they thought the current level was actually supporting their needs or not.
I don't recall any incident right now. It was mostly the need for was more user control or more fine-grained control possibilities.
I would expect with users that are relatively new to this kind of automation, they wouldn't be asking for more. So I think that's a reasonable answer that there were none. Okay. The next question I have is also about automation, and it's about how you analyze the results of your data. So if you take I think publication number 2 with the Socially app on Facebook, it seemed like, and this is my reading of it, that for the most part, automation failed, except for a small number of users. Almost everybody turned it off or just didn't even use it. There was maybe 3 high level users.
3 high users, 6 low users.
So, because the users abandoned it fairly quickly, I guess I'm worried about, and maybe I'm reading too much into what you wrote. But it seems like you drew the conclusion that for those users, automation failed. Is that a fair assessment? For the 6 users, that automation failed.
Well, it failed in the sense that it didn't support their goals.
Right. So. Is there an opportunity to do a different kind of automation for those users to support their goals, or is for them automation shouldn't be attempted?
Of course, it could be made better. So that for example, in the publication 2, the system could sense users' context in better ways. And definitely, I think the user experience would maybe better in that case.
One of the conclusions you draw, so I'm just trying to find this exactly. One of the conclusions you draw, and the only reason I'm looking up is I want to get the exact wording, is about how. So you say something like, automation doesn't automatically lead to a better user experience, and that I completely believe. And then there's a secondary part of that, which is, let me get it wrong now, increasing automation can lead to a worse user experience. Is that right? I can't remember exactly what you said. Can you help me?
I don't think those are not.
No, I'm trying to find the words that you use because the wording is important. Sorry, I'm struggling to find it.
Not the point. Well, you can reframe the question.
Yeah, so I guess the question I really want to ask is a very specific one about that publication number 2 in the Socially app. So not for what information is disclosed about me, but when I'm consuming information, you found that some people, it was just too much, right? And some users that really cared changed the update frequency, the notification frequency, and others did not. And I'm wondering about the conclusion that that automation failed, leading to a worse user experience, versus it was just a poor implementation of the automation. So you can imagine something where there wasn't a visual or an immediately interruptive cue. My read of, when I read the paper on that piece of work, made it seem like at least for some users, where you had the quotes, it was really about the nature of the interruption of the cue that made them not want to use the application. And that they may or may not have minded the fact that the notifications were coming automatically. And so I guess I'm trying to tease apart what conclusions you can draw about the value of automation in general from what I take in this case to be, and I'm not hurting your work because you didn't implement it, what I see to be just a poor implementation of the automation, or a poorly thought out implementation of the automation.
Yes, I agree that that it just couldn't. The context awareness was too simple. It just used time as a context, but still, I think the message from all of these applications is that social interaction related context is really, really hard to be aware by a machine.
So given that would argue for not trying to automate that part, wouldn't it? If it's so
Well, not necessarily. You can, as I said, automation is not all or none. By automation, I also mean different, in that case, give control possibilities for the user to make it work as you would like to.
Yeah, so this question was more about not the production of context than as much as it is about the consumption of that result, the automated information. So when a notification came in that, I remember there was one quote from a user, I don't want to be woken up in the middle of the night or in the morning by somebody I hardly know posting some random video, right? And I can appreciate that and understand it. But that speaks more about the way that notification was implemented with this audio cue that was certainly to interrupt whatever it was you were doing, as opposed to a notification that may be more visual in nature and not interruptive. So the fact that users chose not to use pieces of it doesn't mean that automation failed for them, but that implementation of the automation failed for them. Is that clear?
Well, yeah, it is clear. I see those two things kind of that they are the same thing in a way.
Okay.
In a way, like implementation of automation. Yes, it failed, but at the same time, that was the automation they saw. The user sees is the.
It fails as well, but it doesn't mean that automation as a whole, in general, is a failure.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. But in this context, it.
So, in trying to pull the findings from each of these studies, I guess sometimes I got a little bit confused about how you can draw conclusions about automation in general affecting the user experience, as opposed to particular implementations of the automation affecting the user experience, if that makes sense. Because the thesis has to generalize, of course.
Sure. But in the end, none of my results related to design guidelines or related to understanding pros and cons. None of them were only from one publication.
No, of course.
So she wasn't able to get people to boil their water except one person who was already otherwise outside of the community.
So you mentioned an opportunity for designers to go to the control panel for the person who's producing information. Is there a similar need for a control panel for the people that are consuming the information?
Well, I would say so.
What should that control panel allow me to do? Besides, I mean, you've mentioned notification frequency. What other things should that control panel do?
Well, of course, the level of for example, what kind of medium is the notification? Is it allowed? Is it silent?
Right.
And then the frequency.
Anything else you can think of?
Of course, then there's the information content. How much there's going to be of information.
Right. So maybe just volume of information.
So I think those three are at least the prime ones.
Okay. I guess I was always also thinking about the granularity of data. That's really related to frequency.
Well, yeah, granularity. Yes.
Okay. So, I guess, and I was sort of keeping this for my last question, but I'm not quite there yet, but I'll ask you it anyway, which is, it seems like we're setting up an impossibly difficult design problem, where if I'm designing, forget about existing social media, let's say I'm building a new social media system, and it turns out in my group we are, and that's particularly why I find the timing of reading your thesis really good, because it's actually impacting a lot of decisions that we're trying to make about the design of this new system we're working on. But it leaves me troubled in that I feel like there's almost too many decisions we have to make now. So we have to put in a control, you're suggesting we should put in a control panel for each user on the production side. There's a control panel on the consumption side. There should be control mechanisms, which may or may not exist in the control panel itself, to approve or disapprove individual decisions that the system makes. Not every decision, but certain inferences that the system may make. I have to decide which parts of the process should I make manual, which parts I should make automatic. And it leaves me wondering whether we should do automation at all. Just because it becomes such a challenging design process to get anything right. Now clearly, there's lots of systems that are automating and they didn't put half as much thought, not even half, a tenth as much thought as you have into this problem. But now knowing everything, or knowing a piece of what you know, I'm not sure what to do. So can you offer me and other people any advice on what they should practically do in designing their systems?
Well, as I tell in my design implications, it's I don't think there's an easy way. Like first, understand your user. Then, second, know the technology, know the limits of the technology, and third, remember that user will take control if the technology doesn't represent the context good enough. But on the other hand, it doesn't like pressure the automation so much that it had to be perfect. As I said, the control possibilities. There are many control possibilities outside the technology. User can have behavioral control. Also, she could
discussion makes me feel much more sympathetic towards Facebook and all the troubles they've had in coming up with reasonable disclosure and projection possibilities and trying to get their policies correct.
And I think Facebook is, again, an excellent example of how to get things right, because they have evolved like constantly during these several years they have existed. And they always present some new kind of features, and the Facebook community doesn't, some do agree, some don't agree, and
so I like the Facebook example because I think that you're right, it's a wonderful example, but it's not replicable, right? Most of us are not going to have, I don't know how many million users already to allow us that kind of evolutionary process, right? You know, we hope for our research systems we can get thousands of people. I mean, we're pretty excited when we get to thousands. And we certainly don't have the opportunity to do the kind of evolutionary process that you're talking about. And most startups, even from the business world, they also don't have that opportunity. So, again, I'm asking you to extrapolate a little bit from your results and give some advice to a designer, say for a startup. So if somebody's got a brand new idea, what could they do that would either give them the time to do that evolutionary process, or to try and nail down the right places for where they should support control, where things should be manually or automatically done. Because you have such a small window.
yeah, exactly.
It seems impossible. Not quite impossible, but it seems very challenging.
It is challenging, yes. What I would do if I was a startup, I would first go to the field and observe how the actual events are happening, and from that point of view, take those tasks that, with the current technological knowledge and understanding, we are able to make more efficient.
So what you described is basically the normal iterative human-centered process that we should be taking, that we in HCI at least we always do. So can you specify how you would customize that for the set of context-aware social media applications?
Well, first of all, I would concentrate on people's interaction with each other while observing, and learn how they currently interact with each other, what kind of technologies they currently use, and what kind of burdens they currently have, or what kind of good experiences they currently have.
So could you talk about this from the perspective of one of your systems that you studied? So say the video mixing, right? So we all know that people, mostly illegally, when they go to a concert, they'll take a video of the concert. Are people actually talking to other people about their videos and mixing them, or is this a new capability that the system's offering?
Well, there are some services for this kind of video editing, and at least time we were doing this, there was one or two American collaborative video remixing startups.
Right.
And the concept was exactly that. From the last night, let's gather all the video data, and let's make a compilation of that.
So in studying that process, you would try to understand what people's pragmatic and hedonic goals were, and then decide. Again, I'm trying to bring it back to how do I make the design decisions. You would try and figure out where users feel like they need to have control and where you might be free to automate. I might in more detail later on this today, separate from this event, ask you about my particular problem and see if you can give me some advice.
Look forward.
Let me ask you, let's just change topics completely. Let me ask you about some of the implications that you've made, because I think they're really interesting. Your second implication is about set the level of automation in pragmatic tasks so that it also supports hedonic social interaction goals, even if it means making the pragmatic tasks more inefficient by decreasing automation. So it seemed like, for me, and again, I kind of got confused about which set of tasks, if any, I should be making primary in thinking about design, whether I should be designing automation to support the hedonic tasks and then secondarily about the pragmatic tasks, or whether I have to do them in concert, or whether I can put one primary or not. Because again, if I can prioritize, then it helps, it makes the design process easier, but if I have to think about everything together, it just makes it difficult.
Yeah, you're definitely right with that. And in my design guideline, I suggest that you should first go for the hedonic goals, because in the end, if the user feels that it doesn't support, if the pragmatic task, if the automatic implementation of the pragmatic task doesn't support your hedonic goals, it's with everyday social media technology. Yeah, exactly. You want to continue using it. So in that case, the hedonic ones are more important. But certainly there are as we talked, it's a trade-off with usability. So if the pragmatic task is too hard to do, doesn't again.
So how in your, I couldn't really elicit this from your methods section, but explain to me how you were able to elicit the hedonic goals from your users. Right, because pragmatic tasks and pragmatic goals are fairly easy. You can contextual inquiry. There's lots of existing techniques, in our ACI literature that talks to us about how to understand pragmatic goals. But hedonic goals are much more subtle, and users may not even realize what their hedonic, or may not be even able to articulate what their hedonic goals are. So how do I, as a designer, developer, behavioral scientist, go and understand some of these hedonic goals fairly quickly, because I don't want to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out that part of the problem.
Fairly quickly.
Reasonably quickly. The goal is to build the system, right? I want to do some field work, but it has to be limited. I can't spend a year in the field.
Exactly, yeah. Well, first I would have to decide that for who am I going to design this work.
So pick any of your applications that you studied.
So what I do next, I'm going to meet them and going to dig out of them that why are they currently using those technologies they are, for what kind of reason. For example, Facebook, again in my publication too. I learned that some of them use Facebook only pretty much to relax. It's just browsing through. But on the other hand, for some of the users, it was much more important to
stay connected.
Exactly, stay connected and be on time and know what other people are doing.
Were your users able to articulate those goals, or did you have to infer those goals from what they were telling you and then confirm them afterwards?
Well, of course, all kind of qualitative data, it contains interpretation, right? And in that sense, in some cases they were able to do that, but in some cases there were some interpretations too.
I'd like to move on to your third implication. So it says, understand what kind of privacy concerns the increased automation might bring to the user. Consider alternative levels of automation in each information processing stage and provide the user opportunities for privacy management outside the automated task. Does this mean that I should be thinking about each of the 4 stages of processing and the 10 levels of automation with each design decision I make?
Well, in perfect world, yes.
Okay.
Well, of course, there are time limits, and you have to prioritize.
Right.
It's always, of course, context dependent in that particular technology that where you should focus on.
and it also depends what kind of technology it is. So like some with some technologies, people might have more privacy concerns related to acquisition and analysis of the information, whereas with some technologies, the problems might occur only when in the disclosure interaction implementation phase.
So I guess my question is kind of related to this, but in imagining that in a single application, the field research I do might lead me to different points in the design space for this 4x10 matrix, 5x10 matrix, let's say, before and after. So for, let's say, disclosing location, I might have one point in the design space, but for disclosing my activity, I might have a different point in the design space. There's this conflict with the need to have a consistent and understandable user interface for the users. So, I'm not really sure what my question is. Again, this is one of these questions of design and what you recommend in terms of is it more important to have that consistent interface, or is it more important to have hit the sweet spot for every design point? Because the two seem incompatible.
Well, I can refer with that. I can refer to Apple's design guidelines, for example. Apple says that okay, it's enough that 80% of the users are happy, and forget the 20%.
What you tell me what to do? I guess I'm trying to balance the need for consistency against the fact that in more complex applications than the ones you studied, I think the ones you studied looked at sort of single points of disclosure. So if you take the Facebook one, where it was not just disclosing, well, it was disclosing, sorry, let me take that a different way. Let's take the microblogging one, where it wasn't just disclosing location, but it was disclosing activity, and it was disclosing who I was around, right? So it's 3 different points where I was disclosing information in some automated fashion. For each of those 3 design decisions of how to do it, I might choose a different automation and control point, right? And so then I'm left, and that's during the design phase. And so then I'm left with the decision of, do I sort of take the average, for lack of a better term, somehow aggregate those design decisions so that I have a consistent interface across all 3? Or is it sufficient to leave them as 3 different points and just expect the users that will understand, well, for this is how the system works, for this is how the system works, for this one, this is how the system works?
Well, yeah, I totally understand your point.
It's just as these systems get more complex.
Exactly. That's the thing with the.
And it's the goal, right? I mean, you want this to apply to more complex systems.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the problem is that there is no silver bullet in here, but one approach is that you set the automation level kind of on average for the disclosure, but you also give underneath of the user interface, like in deeper settings of the user interface, you give the control capabilities, so they are not in front of the user's face all the time.
Right.
And also as one of my design guidelines in publication 2 was that if the system is automated really heavily, it might get well. If one of the extremes are used, people usually don't like extremes, so it may be better to begin with the middle ground, and then let the user do the rest, right, as you want.
Right. And I can absolutely see the value of evolving the systems over time as the system learns what the user even wants to do. But again, I take your really nice point about you don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
It's just people will just abandon it. that brings me to my last set of questions, and then I'll stop. And that's around your fifth implication around the logic, understanding the logic of systems. One of the results you got, try and take results of a couple of your studies. When you talked about the microblogging site, I think, was your first publication, you made the observation that poor original mental models led to some users, the high-level users, the high users, to explore some of the automation settings. But that didn't seem to occur in the automated video editing system, right? They had most, and again, I may be articulating this incorrectly, but it seemed like in the video editing system, users didn't have good mental models, and that actually impacted the way they created the content to begin with. But they didn't seem to go and explore, and I don't know if there was an opportunity in that application for them to explore different settings. So could you try and help me understand how these two different systems worked and why users were able to take one path in one of these systems but not a similar path in the other system?
Well, yeah, the systems were different in a way that in the microblogging system, there was in a way some kind of compatibility, but in the video remixing.
Well, there was none at all?
No.
Oh, I didn't understand. Okay. Okay. Well, that makes sense, yeah. This question of how to support mental models, what you've referred to as understanding the logic of systems, I might immediately go to Norman's idea of the user conceptual model. And I'm curious about, given the complexity, the potential complexity of what these automated systems are doing, how do you propose to expose these models to users?
Well, one thing I would propose is to give user proper feedback about the actions of the technology. So in those possible trouble spots, the system will explain.
Sorry to interrupt, but are you suggesting that the system only provides explanations, or that the system is self-aware enough that it would know what the trouble spots are?
Well, of course, it would be much better if the system would actually learn what the trouble spots are, and in that case, suggest that, suggest solutions for the trouble spots. But also, one approach would be to give the user access to her data and visualize how the information is processed in different phases.
So Facebook does something like this, right? So I can take on the role of a friend in a particular group, and then I can see how a posting would look to that friend.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the kind of thing you're suggesting.
That's kind of the thing. Yeah. So that it would make user situation awareness better, so he could predict future outcomes better.
You're making the job of a designer very challenging. I mean, it's an additional thing now for them to consider. Okay, I believe that covers all the questions.
Ladies and gentlemen,
so first I would like to thank the candidate for a very engaging discussion. Like I said, I had several questions I will ask you afterwards about how to build my own systems in this space. In discussing the candidate's thesis, I want to talk about different sections or different aspects of the thesis. First, in discussing this, I want to talk about the organization and presentation of the thesis itself. The thesis research was conducted logically and was presented in a logical fashion. Any thesis that examines the user experience of any kind of complex system necessarily has to explore a range of the systems. And I was very impressed with the range and quality of the systems that the candidate was able to explore in quite an amazing amount of depth, considering 5 fairly large, in terms of population as well as in time, field studies went into this. It was an impressive amount of research that went into this. The individual studies were conducted well. The generalization in particular across the studies is what where the main contribution comes from, those kinds of contributions are, of course, extremely valuable to the field, and the design implications that were constructed out of that are, of course, very useful. The scientific significance of the thesis, I think, is quite high, particularly because of these implications that were able to be drawn out across these 5 different studies. And I feel like the thesis was based on some very innovative thinking. While many of the researchers in the field of social media systems focus on designing new technologies, as we talked about at the beginning of our discussion, to talk about new technologies or new opportunities providing value for social networks, I think very few these days are now focused on trying to understand how to improve our existing social media structures. And so I commend the candidate on trying to understand this intersection of context-aware systems, user experience, and existing social media structures, and then being able to project on how it will affect the design of future social media structures. Particularly as the goal of context-aware computing in the larger field of ubiquitous computing is making the goals are to make computing seamless. This role of automation cannot be ignored, and I feel like too many researchers in the field are sort of ignoring this, and so drawing attention to it and highlighting this, I think, is a really important thing to do. The closest work I can identify to you researchers thinking this way is in privacy in social media settings, where they are starting to investigate what the role is, and a little bit to the growing set of researchers that are doing work in the space of examining the role of intelligibility in context-aware systems similarly. But few are looking at this crossover of context-aware systems and social media systems. I think the work was quite novel in making these 4 distinct contributions that I elicited or enumerated at the beginning. In my opening statement, the understanding of the costs and benefits of using automation, and identifying what role automation has in the face of varying constraints of users and goals that users may have, and in understanding the negative consequences of automation, and then trying to understand to the best of our abilities how to design around it, and then of course these 5 implications. To add to my assessment of the scientific contribution or scientific significance, I feel like the candidate applied a variety of different kinds of frameworks, which didn't really come out necessarily in any of the presentations, but I found very useful in trying to understand the structuring of automation for this field. And I hope more researchers in the field take on the kind of frameworks that you applied in trying to understand automation, because I think they're quite valuable, and they were certainly new to me, which is surprising because I have done some work in automation myself, but it was new to me and I found it very useful, particularly the different opportunities there were to automate and then the different levels of automation. The problem setting for the thesis is a very, very strong point for the work. The focus on the role of automation in social media systems is really important, as I said in my opening statement, given that so many of us carry around smartphones and have constant access to our social network at all times, whether that's a good or a bad thing. So there's this huge opportunity for us to consume huge amounts of information, vast amounts of information about our social networks, and the opportunity to produce content for those social networks. And a key measure of the value of this work is the fact that any of these existing systems any of the designers of the existing systems could take the implications of your thesis and apply it to their work and improve their system. That's all with a caveat of there's still some work to be done in trying to take these implications and applying it to any existing system. And if anything, that's probably the only weak point I can see in the candidate's work, is that there's still this gap between the actual results that the candidate produced and the specifics on how to apply it to any given system. I definitely appreciate the approach taken in this thesis in not only adding additional systems to the large set that already exist, but to study such a wide variety of these existing systems and the methods that were taken on. Certainly the methods were a strong point for this thesis, conducting such a wide variety of studies where not only individuals have to be recruited and deployed to, but in some cases you had to recruit entire social groups, which again, from my own work, I know how difficult that is, and it really is commendable to be able to do that. While little of the work discussion in the thesis was actually published by the candidate alone, it was very clear that the team of people working on the different projects played a supporting role, and that the evaluation and the analysis was definitely conducted by the candidate. And again, more specifically, the generalizations across all of these studies can be definitely attributed to the candidate. My comments on the discussion, I found the discussion, as I hopefully is clear, very thoroughly enjoying. I've done this, this is my third opportunity to be an opponent in Finland, and this was certainly my most exciting, interesting experience, I think, because I saw so many ways that I could take the work that was presented and apply it immediately to the work that I'm doing myself. So thank you for that. I think the candidate did a good job in discussing the analysis results and in drawing reliable conclusions from this work, and did a satisfactory job of answering my challenges and requests for more information on this. So I'll end my statement with my most important remarks, and that is that I recommend that the candidate in his thesis receive a passing grade for the awarding of a doctorate of technology.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions or comments concerning my dissertation, please ask Kostas for the floor.
Public examinations